Look, the problem with U.S. foreign policy is that it's based on a lot of lies, and the lies just keep spilling over. And I've now lived a long time hearing and actually studying the lies because I go back to the Vietnam War era. My first lessons in geopolitics were in the 1960s. A lot of lies were told then, and not dissimilar to the lies that are being told now about the U.S. in Ukraine, actually. But the modern era in 21st century began with massive lies about Iraq. And I happened to be on a show the day that Colin Powell had made his presentation to the UN Security Council about Saddam's weapons of mass destruction. Actually, the Charlie Rose show, and I was in a group, and I think there were 6 of us around the table, and all of them said, "Yes, yes, General Powell, he's telling it like it is." And they turned to me, and I said, it's lies. You can hear it. Actually, this is not the truth. And they focused the camera on me. "Are you calling General Powell a liar?" And I said, "Well, I'm saying he's lying." And of course he was. This was bogus arguments for a massive war that ended up costing the United States trillions of dollars. So all I can say is you get into the habit of it actually a little bit. In 2011, I happened to be on Morning Joe the day that, or maybe the day after President Obama, Secretary Clinton said, Assad must go. Okay, here we go again, another regime change operation, absolutely doomed to fail, as always. And I was on the show and I said, this is gonna be bad again. And they were very surprised because, as you said, it was the common narrative that Assad's bad, Assad must go. And we keep doing this in foreign policy. We make up narratives, we decide something. The State Department spokesman says it often enough. The White House declares something often enough. And for most of the media, that becomes the truth. It's weird. Don't people think? Well, actually, they do think because they don't believe the U.S. government, but a lot of the media don't question the U.S. government anymore. That's really disappointing because the role of the media actually should be to be skeptical and to say, "Oh yeah, is that really right? Why don't you show us the evidence?" And they don't do that anymore.
Yeah. Well, I think part of it too is they just really don't even know, right? I mean, Morning Joe and Mika Brzezinski, they're probably 2 of the more educated types to have TV shows on major cable TV news. But it
You
seemed
know,
like,
it
well,
it
this is the enemy of the month right here, but neither of them were able to put it in the context that you were putting it in. That, well, wait a minute, Al Qaeda in Iraq, these were the bad guys from the last war in Iraq on the other side of the line, and now we're calling them moderates, and we're pretending that the Shiite aligned dictator in the 3-piece suit is somehow worse than a bunch of bin Ladenites.
well, but I think the basic point is that with experience, you come to know that most foreign policy is conducted through these kind of confabulated narratives. We're not told the truth. It's not the business of the American people to meddle in U.S. foreign policy. That's the basic view of the permanent state. And we created back in 1947 the CIA with the uh, express directions. Look, you're a secret agency. You report to the president. I assume that's true. I hope all of the time, but who knows? But in any event, yeah, you operate in secret. So we designed a foreign policy based on secrecy. And when you're experienced in this over the course of many, many years, you know that you're not hearing even the basics. But at least there should be skepticism to realize this, but maybe even that point is not realized or it's not worth it, makes the viewers uncomfortable. It is pretty worrisome to me, though, that these days on crucial issues, really issues that are potentially shaping the future of the planet, we don't hear two sentences of truth in a row often.
Yeah, boy, that sure is right, and especially with the current situation here. And I think this is probably anybody's experience if they've ever actually dealt with the media. If anybody's ever been in the newspaper, they know that, well, wait a minute, that's not what I said, or not exactly, or the reporter didn't understand what I was trying to tell him, or at best, right? Like, just about anything. So obviously, you have a background where you know a lot about Russia. So this controversy breaks out in Eastern Europe, and you go, well, everybody, I got all this context for
Yeah.
you. But they don't have that context. So obviously, it's not that you're looking at it from Vladimir Putin's point of view, but from the point of view of an American who actually understands the background a little bit. So can you explain? I mean, they say, and they seem to mean it, sir, that Vladimir Putin has this right-wing ideology that says he has to recreate the Russian Empire. He's a revanchist. And we have to stand up to him, or else he'll be in Berlin in a couple of years.
Yeah, this is just the weirdest narrative, and a very unfortunate one. Putin did not want this war. He actually made diplomatic demands, I would say, but he made diplomatic demands at the end of 2021 that in my view, and I said it to the White House actually, were the basis for serious negotiation. They weren't flippant, they weren't crazy, they were real. And the center of this, and I've watched this now for more than 30 years, pretty close up, is the question of NATO on Russia's border. And that's an issue, by the way, you could trace it for 2 centuries. Russia does not like what it perceives as a potential enemy or an actual enemy on its border. And when you've been invaded by Hitler and by Napoleon and by Palmerston and Napoleon III and lots of forces over history, you just want some space. And this current story did not start in February 24th, 2022. It started back in 1990. I happen to have been there, which is pretty weird, but I was an economic advisor to Mikhail Gorbachev, the last president of the Soviet Union. I was an economic advisor to Boris Yeltsin, the first president of independent Russia. I was an economic advisor to Leonid Kuchma, the first president of Ukraine. I was an economic advisor to President Yushchenko, who followed Kuchma as president of Ukraine. I've seen this with my own eyes. In 1990, Gorbachev unilaterally, and I want to underscore unilaterally, disbanded the Soviet military alliance, which was called the Warsaw Pact. The US couldn't believe it. Germany couldn't believe it. They said, oh my God, thank you. We will not take advantage of this. And a famous expression was uttered repeatedly to Gorbachev: NATO will not move 1 inch eastward to take advantage of your unilateral disarming of the Warsaw Pact. And that turned out to be a big lie. As soon as the Soviet Union ended in December 1991, the neocons in the Bush Senior administration, Cheney, Wolfowitz, Rumsfeld, and this is a lot of Washington, by the way, started saying, okay, now NATO starts to expand. Bill Clinton came in, sided with kind of the deep state argument. Now NATO expands. All of the promises that were made, forget it. We're now the sole superpower in the world. We can do what we want. And interestingly, Clinton's own Secretary of Defense, a wonderful person, William Perry, said, come on, this is going to upset what we're building, which is trust with Russia, which is crucial because Russia remains a major nuclear power, and we want to actually build a peaceful generation. So Perry came close to resigning over Clinton's decision to expand NATO, decided in the end he wouldn't resign. The American people never really heard anything about this debate. And the first expansion came to Central Europe, to Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic. But then George W. Bush Jr. came in, and the neocons, led by Cheney, went into overdrive on 100 different fronts. The U.S. unilaterally walked out of the anti-ballistic missile treaty, to the absolute deep anxiety and chagrin of Russia, because they viewed this as directed towards Russia. The U.S. unilaterally launched the Iraq War on false pretenses. NATO expanded to 7 more countries. 2004 with the 3 Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, Slovakia, Slovenia, Romania, and Bulgaria, right up against the Black Sea. Putin said in 2007, stop, you're getting awfully close, and I'm telling you, you're crossing our red lines. George W. in 2008 at the Bucharest summit says, no, now we go on to Ukraine and to Georgia. And the Europeans themselves were horrified, but Europe has no foreign policy. Bush pushed through the final communique in Bucharest at the NATO summit, the expansion of NATO to Ukraine and to Georgia. Actually, European leaders told me at the time, what the hell is your president doing? This is unbelievably destabilizing. So then Ukraine got a president who gave a little bit of protection. Yanukovych said, we want to be neutral. We want to stay out of a proxy war between these two giants. We will be neutral. Then comes the neocons, and they contributed to his overthrow, a violent coup in February 2014. And we heard on tape our then Assistant Secretary of State, our current Undersecretary of State, Victoria Nuland, one of the leaders of the neoconservatives, talking about who the new government would be. The U.S. was picking who it would be. I saw some of this pretty close up, actually. It was really unpleasant, irresponsible. And that's when the war started in February 2014 with the overthrow of a pro-Russian president that was trying to maintain neutrality. Russia took back Crimea, by the way, exactly as Putin said to Bush would happen when he discussed Russia's red line in 2008. So this was all, if you were watching, knew what was going on, watching behind the scenes, this was this tragedy playing out step by step. The U.S. flooded the zone with NATO weaponry between 2014 and 2021. Things weren't just standing still. There was a war going on. It was a lower intensity war, but NATO was, and the U.S. basically, was flooding Ukraine with billions of dollars of armaments. Okay, then comes the elections, 2020, Biden comes in, and Putin says basically to Biden, look, this is our last chance. You're building up really a large NATO army on our border. You're talking about NATO enlargement. Still, the U.S. signed 3 major documents in 2021 that NATO will move to Ukraine. And at the end of 2021, Putin said, look, you got to stop. This is our red line. No NATO enlargement. I happened to call the White House then and spoke to senior officials, let's say, said, take it. Don't have a war. I was told, yeah, NATO's not going to enlarge. Oh, NATO's not going to enlarge? Then say it so we can avoid a war. Of course, I didn't believe what they were saying because they just want to kind of slip it through. But They refused absolutely to negotiate with Putin. And so after basically 7 years of war, Putin took this major escalation in February 24th, 2022, and all our newspapers said, an unprovoked action that started this day because he thinks he's Peter the Great. Crazy. Completely phony. No journalism, no background, no history, no context, no understanding, but also no attempt in the slightest to give Americans a background to this, to explain what this is about, where this came from. Wars don't come out of the blue like this. In fact, this was a war that was going on already for 8 years. But where's the media? It's just unbelievable. The intention is to spin a story that everything started a year ago, and don't try to think of anything from a moment before that, because otherwise then you're a Putin apologist if you think of anything a moment before that. That's where we are.